many other...
This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live broadcast from Washington DC. I'm Nick Harper, and in this bulletin we'll bring you all the updates on major stories developing around the world. But first, the headlines. At least 40 people killed and dozens missing after heavy rains and floods washed through western Germany. Many of the missing were on the roofs of houses that were swept away by the flooding. The Taliban sets conditions for peace. The terror group proposes a 3-month ceasefire in Afghanistan in return for the release of 7,000 insurgent prisoners and the removal of names of their leaders from the UN blacklist. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar meets Ashraf Ghani on the sidelines of the Central and South Asian Connectivity Summit in Tashkent. Jaishankar reiterates India's support for peace, stability and the development of Afghanistan. Pakistan security forces used tear gas to disperse hundreds of people trying to breach a border crossing into Afghanistan. This a day after the Taliban seized control of the Afghan side of the frontier. The EU launches legal action against Hungary and Poland over anti-LGBTQ measures. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen says Europe will not allow parts of its society to be stigmatised over personal choices. After week-long riots and looting in South Africa, community members in the worst affected areas begin a cleaning initiative in the streets of Johannesburg and Durban. At least 42 people have died and dozens are missing as heavy rains and floods have lashed western Germany. The rising water has caused several houses to collapse. Rhineland and Palatin and North Rhine-Westphalia are the worst hit states. Emergency workers are struggling to evacuate people. 2 firemen have been killed in the line of duty, while rescue workers have been deployed in helicopters. A crisis hotline has now been set up for people to file a report about those who've gone missing in the floods. Authorities have described the situation as very serious. People have also been urged to stay at home if possible and to move to higher floors. Rail and road transport has also been disrupted in the region. Shipping on parts of the Rhine, an important trade artery, has been suspended. More heavy rain was due in southwestern Germany, according to the Weather Department. The full extent of the damage in the region was still unclear as many villages were cut off by floodwater and landslides. Authorities have declared an emergency in the region, which has seen widespread damage. In Belgium, around 10 houses collapsed in Prinster after the river Verster flooded the eastern town. Residents from over 1,000 homes have now been evacuated. Local media reported that at least 2 people have died in flooding in southern Belgium, where houses and cars were swept away by rising waters. Afghanistan remains the top focus. According to the Afghan government negotiator, the Taliban has proposed a ceasefire, this in return for the release of insurgent prisoners. The statement comes from Naranadiri, a government negotiator involved in the peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. He said that the Taliban had proposed a 3-month ceasefire in return for the release of about 7,000 insurgent prisoners who've been held in Afghanistan's jails. Naranadiri has called this a big demand, adding that the insurgents also want the names of the Taliban's leaders to be removed from a United Nations blacklist. The demands come from the group amid rapid advances. They now claim to control at least 85% of the districts across the nation, plus all of the border crossing points with Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and now even Pakistan. The truce proposal comes as Pakistan guards used tear gas to disperse hundreds of people who tried to breach a border crossing into Afghanistan. The frontier was closed by Pakistan after the Taliban seized the Afghan side in Spin Boldak district, according to a security official at the southwest Charman border. Around 1,500 people had gathered to cross the border, and a mob of about 400 people tried to cross the gate forcefully. A senior government official said that the situation is now under control. Spin Boldak is the Taliban's biggest strategic gain so far. At least 900 trucks cross this frontier every day. Spin Boldak provides the Taliban a district access and direct access to the Pakistani province of Balochistan. This province is important as this is where the Taliban has its reserve fighters. Also, its top leadership is based there. There's a highway that connects Spin Boldak to Karachi port, and it's a significant gain from the Taliban because it helps them with the heroin trade. Iran President Hassan Rouhani has said that the country could enrich uranium's purity up to 90%. However, Rouhani said that Iran is still seeking a revival of the 2015 nuclear deal. As per the deal, Iran would limit its atomic actions in return for the lifting of sanctions.
صنعت هسته‌ای ما با قدرت باقی موند و تو این ماهای اخیر بیشتر ظاهر شد و نشون داد که سازمان انرژی اتمی ما با چه توانمندی و قدرتش میتونه 20% تولید کنه، میتونه 60% تولید کنه. حتی اگر یه روزی نیاز داشته باشیم ما برای راکتوری 90% هم باشه ما میتونیم، ما مشکل نداریم، هر چه برای صلح‌آمیز در مسیر صلح‌آمیز هر کاری رو ما میتونیم انجام بدیم.
The nuclear deal caps Tehran's fissile purity to refine uranium at 3.67%. This is below the 20% uranium purity achieved by Iran before the deal and far under the 90% required for a nuclear weapon. Iran has long denied any intention of developing nuclear weapons. Iran has produced 20% and 60% enriched uranium after Washington pulled out of the deal. Outgoing President Rouhani will hand over the presidency to Ibrahim Raisi on August the 5th. Rouhani was quoted by the state news agency as criticising the supreme leadership for not allowing the government to revive the nuclear deal. Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah, is the final authority on all state matters. The incoming president has backed indirect talks with Washington over the accord. Washington called off the deal back in 2015 after calling it biased towards Iran, and it went on to impose crippling sanctions on the country. The US state of Washington has declared a statewide drought emergency due to hot and dry conditions. At least 91 people in the state have died due to record temperatures there. Governor Jay Inslee has called the season the summer of climate change.
Because frankly, we know this about climate change. You can run, but you can't hide. And that's what we have to face. And I hope that we will do so. Now, today, as partial response to this problem, I'm declaring a drought emergency for nearly the entire state.
A drought emergency is declared when the water supply is projected to be below 75% of the average. The situation can pose difficulties for people and the environment. The state will now provide aid for agriculture, and it'll take steps to protect public water supplies and boost water flow in streams to safeguard fish. Last week, Washington governor had declared a state of emergency due to the growing risk of wildfires. Scientists have warned that the weather will get wilder as the planet warms up. According to the University of Nebraska's Drought Monitor, nearly 60% of the United States West Coast is in exceptional or extreme drought conditions. That's the highest level that it's been at in 20 years. The United States Drought Monitor has said that 95% of Washington state is either abnormally dry or in exceptional drought already. The state received the third lowest level of rain and snow from April to June this year. That was the lowest level in 127 years. A few miles away from Washington state, the state of Oregon is witnessing the so-called bootleg fire at the moment. It's already burned through 1,200,000 acres of forest and destroyed at least 20 homes. It's now ranked as the largest of 10 major active wildfires. Bootleg erupted on July the 6th and has spread mostly unchecked. 2,000 homes are at risk of being engulfed by the flames. The fire has already burned 332 square miles, an area larger than New York City.
The best way that I can describe the fire growth is during our tenure here, the fire has grown 2 to 3 project fires every day. What does that mean? Normally on a project fire, we assign an incident management team because of the complexity.
Residents in remote parts of North California were warned to be ready for evacuation. Fire warnings have been in place for the interior of Oregon, eastern Washington, parts of Idaho and the northeast corner of California. These areas have been experiencing winds and very low humidity. Local tribes in the area have been severely affected. Wildfires are becoming more difficult to fight, with climate change making America's West much warmer and drier in the past 30 years. Now, the world's largest rainforest, the Amazon, was humanity's saving grace. With record-breaking CO2 emissions, the rainforest was absorbing much of it. Or at least that's what we did think. New research, however, reveals that the fight against global warming, the Amazon, could now turn from humanity's greatest natural ally into a foe. The next report has the details.
The Amazon rainforest, which is also known as lungs of the earth, might be stripped of that title. Our planet's largest rainforest is now emitting more carbon dioxide than it absorbs. Research has revealed this for the first time. Hundreds of high-altitude air samples prove this worrying trend. Parts of the Amazon have become a source of carbon dioxide. The giant forest had previously been a carbon sink, which means it was absorbing the emissions driving the climate crisis. But this new revelation could turn humanity's greatest natural ally in the fight against global warming into a foe. This is cause for great concern. Because of the Amazonia, which has around 450 billion tons of CO2 locked in its trees and soil, becomes a consistent source of CO2, tackling the climate crisis would become next to impossible. Just in 2019, our CO2 emissions recorded an all-time high, about 40 billion tons. Over the last half-century, plants and soil have absorbed more than a quarter of those emissions. So how did the situation deteriorate so much? Well, decades of illegal felling, deliberate fires by loggers, rising temperatures, drought, and an incompetent government have all led to this day. The man-made crisis has pushed the rainforest into a vicious cycle. The trees produce much of the region's rain, so fewer trees means more severe droughts and heat waves. That means more wildfires, which again will lead to the death of trees. The Brazilian government has been criticized for encouraging more deforestation. It has surged to a 12-year high. As we speak, the Amazon continues to burn. Loggers continue to tear down trees. And the international community continues to condemn President Jair Bolsonaro. What we don't realize is that our fight against climate change is being delayed, and we are heading towards a point of no return. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The Communist government of Cuba is currently facing its largest protests in decades. People continue to come out of the streets for a fourth day. Anger against things like shortages of basic goods, curbs on civil liberties, all of those are growing like wildfire. And a COVID-19 surge is also adding to people's problems in the country. Experts say these protests could become a turning point for the country. This is worrying the government. Authorities there have resorted to assault, arrests and internet shutdowns to try and stop the demonstrations. The crackdown has led to 1 death and over 100 arrests. A 23-year-old man named Karel Aguila was arrested for protesting alone. The footage on your screens is from a small city in Cuba called Guibara. The young man was seen shouting in public before being escorted to a police patrol. His mother, who's in Austria, posted this video on Facebook. She's now asking for his release. While Cuban authorities restored internet access after 3 days of a blackout, social media platforms like Facebook and WhatsApp still remain blocked. Meanwhile, the Cuban president has called on the protesters for peace and harmony.
It is also a call for peace and harmony among Cubans and respect, and to overcome disagreements between all of us. We have to encourage each other to try and find solutions, even if we sometimes have different points of view on certain issues or different situations.
The president also slammed the Cuban netizens for calling his government repressive. In a statement, President Miguel Diaz-Canel said, quote, "Social media is totally aggressive. Revolutionaries are calling for murder and lynchings. This story that they're trying to compile on social media that the Cuban government is repressive is a complete lie and liable. This is media terrorism," unquote. On restricted social media platforms, residents called for humanitarian aid. The government denounced it, calling it a malicious effort to destabilise the country. One of the campaign's demands was to lift customs restrictions on things like food, medicine and hygiene products. After 3 years, the Prime Minister has finally acted on his promise. All restrictions have now been lifted until year-end, but it's not clear yet how much of a difference that change will make to Cuba's humanitarian situation. Because of the pandemic, there are very few flights into the Caribbean island nation. The protesters have the full support of the United States government. In a statement, the White House has called for the immediate release of those who've been detained in the protests. This comes as Cuban authorities blamed US economic pressure for the crisis. The Biden administration is still reviewing its policy on Cuba and said that the protests will have an impact on its approach.
I think we've been pretty clear that we think people are leaving Cuba, or not leaving Cuba, or protesting in the streets as well, because they are opposed to the oppression, to the mismanagement of the government in the country. And we certainly support their right to protest. We support their efforts to speak out against their treatment in Cuba.
Germany has also condemned the violence against protesters in Cuba. The Foreign Minister Heiko Maas took to Twitter to call on the Cuban government to seek dialogue and release all of those who'd been arrested. These protests against the Cuban government are not confined to the Caribbean nation. They've already spread to other parts, including Spain, the United States, Argentina and Chile. People have come out in support of the protesters. Groups denounced disappearances, political prisoners and the lack of freedom of expression in Cuba. People are hopeful that international communities could pressurise the current government to act on the crisis. Protests broke out in Haiti's capital as fuel shortages added to the concerns over political insecurity there. Some protesters even set tyres ablaze. The assassination of Haiti's president, Jovenel Moïse, pitched the already troubled Caribbean nation into chaos. Marking a week since Moïse's assassination, mourners also paid tribute to the former president in the capital, Port-au-Prince.
In Haiti's capital, mourners laid flowers at a tribute to President Jovenel Moïse on Wednesday, marking 1 week since his assassination. On the same day, scattered protests broke out as fuel shortages added to concerns over insecurity. Moïse was shot dead at his home by what Haitian authorities describe as a unit of assassins, including 2 Haitian Americans and 26 Colombians, 5 of which are still on the run. A third Haitian American, Christian Emmanuel Sanon, was arrested on Sunday by Haitian authorities. They have accused him of being a mastermind of the attack. Another name that has come to light is Worldwide Capital Lending Group, who Haitian police say is responsible for fundraising the crime. The company, which is based in Florida, did not reply to a request for comment. Police also named former Haitian Senator John Joel Joseph as a key player in the plot. They say he supplied weapons and planned meetings. Authorities are searching for him. Moïse's killing has plunged poverty-stricken Haiti into chaos. The fuel shortage has paralysed Haiti's biggest city, Port-au-Prince. Residents blamed the fuel shortage on gangs and opportunistic black market sellers. Also on Wednesday, Haiti's UN ambassador Antonio Rodriguez appealed for support.
These challenges include organizing an inclusive national dialogue, organizing democratic, free and transparent elections, and significant support for the government's ability to meet the socioeconomic needs of the population.
Washington has sent a team of experts to investigate Moïse's murder, with a focus on any connection to the US.
And that's all we have time for on this edition of WION Live broadcast from Washington, D.C. But I'll leave you with these visuals from England, where outdoor theatre at Shakespeare's birthplace by the River Avon has opened up again. The British Royal Shakespeare Company has returned with its first full-scale production in front of a live audience in over a year. And they're presenting a new version of the Comedy of Errors. Take a look.
I felt there are 2 really powerful reasons to build this theatre, one of which was as a sort of symbol, a symbol of regeneration and of opening up, but also as a transition, so that people will feel very comfortable sitting outside in the open air, in the fresh air, and that might then give them more confidence when we open Magician's Elephant in October in the Royal Shakespeare Theatre to move back indoors. So we hope that this acts as both a symbol of opening up, but also of transition.
I know, quoth he, no house, no wife, no mistress. So that my errand, due unto my tongue, I thank him, I bear home upon my shoulders.
You know, it's a beautiful spot here in Stratford. We're right by the river right here now. And so we get some heckling from some swans occasionally, all that kind of stuff. But I guess this is what happened 400 years ago. You know, there weren't too many roofs around and stuff like that in the theatre then. Now, one of my favourite things about doing this kind of stuff is that it feels sort of timeless, really. No matter what the culture, what the country, people have always sort of stood in a space and shared a few jokes. And it's just a really nice thing to be part of that.
This is right, Arab.